has already come up in section 1.2, maybe even in 1.1. But here's a graph. It's a graph of a parabola. If I ask you to calculate f of 2, all you need to do is go to an x value of 2, and then of course you read down to the graph, and you read down to the graph, you have a y value, which is negative 2. So f of 2 would be equal to negative 2. F of 4, when you go over to an x value of 4, you have a y value of 0, so f of 4 is equal to 0. Now, the domain. Well, we've already talked about domains a little bit. Domains, remember, domains mean your x values. Your range means your y values. So your domain is the x values that work in this situation. So there is no equation here. There's just a graph. It's a parabola. What values of x can you put into a parabola? Can you put negative numbers into a parabola? Yes. So if I pick this -1 and I read up to the graph, am I going to touch a point, a value on the graph? Yes, I'm going to get an answer. If I pick a positive number, even if it's positive 3, I'm going to have to read down to the graph, but I will still get an answer. What happens if you pick an x value that's, say, over here, and I read up to the graph, it never touches. But remember, this parabola will go on infinitely far, and eventually it will touch the graph. All right, the range. The range is all the y values that we get out of this. Well, the range, means the y direction as I marked over here. So the parabola never hits any y value below -2. So that means that our parabola always sits at -2 or it sits above -2. So we're saying here that the range is everything from -2 all the way up to positive infinity. If you have the equation, you can type the equation into y equals in your calculator, make a table, and when you look at your table, you will see that the y values in this situation would never be any lower than a -2. So they'd always be -2 or they would be greater than that. All right. Example, f of x is equal to the square root of x. Now, Melissa has brought this up a couple of times. How come we only see this part of it, the top part of that? Because when you take the square root, you actually can have, you can have two answers, positive answers and negative answers. If I wanted you to graph, the negatives too, I would have to put a positive and a negative sign in front of the square root of x. But it is not there. It just says the square root of x. Therefore, you just assume that you are graphing the top half of it. So, in this case, f of x is equal to the square root of x. If I ask you to calculate f of 4 is equal to 2 because all you're doing is taking the square root of 4, which is equal to 2. Now, again, it doesn't say to take the positive and the negative value. Therefore, you are just going to assume the positive. f of 0 would be the square root of 0, which is equal to 0. The domain, well, what values of x, this is the graph over here, so what values of x can you take the square root of? You can take the square root of 0, you can take the square root of anything that is positive. Therefore, the domain is anything starting at 0 and then ending at infinity. The range, what kind of answers are you going to get out of the function? If you put in zeros and anything positive, what are you going to get out of it? What kind of answers are you going to, if you take the square root of 0, what are you going to get? 0. Take the square root of 1, what are you going to get? 1. Take the square root of 2, probably don't know the answer off the top of your head, but it will still give you a positive number, so your range is anything from 0, again, to positive infinity. The next thing that's listed up here is the vertical line test. Well, we've already talked about the vertical line test. You guys are probably very comfortable with that already. Anyway, the vertical line test. Y is a function of x. If and only if, remember that from last year, you guys? If and only if, IFF. If and only if no vertical line intersects its graph at more than 1 point. You guys already know this. Draw a couple pictures here. This first one on the left is a function, and it is a function because it passes the vertical line test. Regardless of where I draw a vertical line, it will only ever touch the graph in exactly one spot. Therefore, y is a function of x. For each x value, I get exactly one y value. The second example is not a function, and it is not a function because when I draw in this vertical line, it touches the graph in two spots. Not a big function. There was one more little part that I wanted to get to here. But we are kind of cutting it close. So I think I'm going to stop right now. It's not difficult, but if tonight when you're working on your homework, if it's asking you to list where is it increasing and where is it decreasing, you can do one of two things. You can just not do it and wait and we'll talk about it tomorrow. Or if you'd like to,